Vegan gardening can seem a bit daunting at first. They don't exactly make ready-made soils that are vegan that you can just buy at your local nursery or your big box store. But if you found some, I'd be interested in knowing where you found them in the comments below. So what's a gardener to do if they want to forego the animal products? Well, that's what we're talking about today on Peaceful Bird. Stay with us. Good afternoon, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Peaceful Bird Gardens. My name is Danny, and it is still quite hot and sticky for us here in Central Florida, so Zone 9B, 10A, as we head into our fall planting season. Yeah, we don't look to get any kind of cooling going on until potentially October, so we're patient. We just came through Hurricane Idalia, and luckily for us, we did not have any significant damage whatsoever. We were totally fine. But our hearts go out to those in the Nature Coast who were not so lucky. So we took off the summer recording. We didn't record at all this summer, honestly, because we just couldn't. We had excessive heat pretty much for weeks and weeks at a time. We had excessive heat advisories, and whenever we would try to record, our camera equipment kept shutting down on us. So we're like, okay, this is just, nature's way of telling us that either we need to go inside, record garden videos inside, or just take a break. And that's what we did. We decided to just take time off and take care of the garden and do other maintenance type things. So we're in shade today because of that reason, because like I said, it is still quite hot. So we'll see how things go moving forward. And I want to thank all of my wonderful new subscribers and anybody who's subscribed to us since the beginning of this channel and given us a like and given us, positive feedback. We just love that so much. So thank you. We sincerely appreciate you guys. What is vegan gardening? Well, for us, it means we grow organically without the addition of animal products, any kind of animal inputs like manure or guano, bone meal, feather meal, blood meal, synthetic fertilizers. That all sounded horrifying to me. So we just stay away from anything that comes from an animal. 99% of all animal products in this country come from factory farms or contain animal feeding operations. And we just can't get down with that here at Peaceful Bird Gardens. We just can't. Now, of course, birds and squirrels and other wildlife come in and add inputs, to our garden. We hope so. That's why we kind of created the system. And that's great, that's wonderful, that's what we want. So we understand that it's not an animal, there's no animal-free gardening. That's silly. But we are not contributing to the exploitation and suffering and ultimate death of animals being a factory farming situation. So how have we been able to create soil in a vegan system? I have recorded other videos on how we've been able to create fertile soil, and I'll include a link somewhere up here in the description below. We don't really have that many videos, so I'm sure you can find it. From my perspective, you need compost. I use homemade compost during annual planting season when I'm planting perennial fruit plants, or to top dress my fruiting plants, my fruiting trees, my shrubs, herbs, pretty much anything. So that's when I use compost. We compost our kitchen scraps, of course, but we also compost all the cuttings and the weeds that we collect throughout the year. Some of that goes into an actual compost bin, but the rest is composted around the garden and around the individual plants, composting in place. So we have wall-to-wall plants in our system, so we simply couldn't support all of those plants on kitchen compost alone. I'd love to, but that's just not realistic for us. So we also make weed tea. And I've talked about that in other videos. We steep garden weeds and other green manure into a tea, and then we feed that to our plants as liquid fertilizer. It's wonderful. It stinks, but it's wonderful. Kitchen compost isn't necessarily complicated as long as you keep your ratios of greens to brown in check. I may do a future video on kitchen composting, but in the meantime, I'll post some resources for you in the description below. This is a topic that's been heavily covered. We have multiple chop and drop plants that we grow for green manure, as it's called. You can plant cover crops or green manure that are suitable for your area. If you live in the South, you could grow a cover crop of, say, like Sunn Hemp. It's Crotalaria, juncea, and I'm probably saying that completely incorrectly. You can grow that. The plant not only fixes atmospheric nitrogen into the soil for other plants to use, but it also suppresses certain species of parasitic nematodes and that feed on your plant roots. So that's wonderful. Sunn Hemp, we grow cover crops like this, but we let the plants grow until they set seed, and then we cover those plants with mulch. That's what I've done in the past. So I grew Sunn Hemp to, I don't know, about 4 feet tall, and then I just took mulch and put it on top of it. I just smushed. I didn't pull the plants out. I didn't cut the plants down. I just smushed them in place, and the plants die, and then they get incorporated into the soil, and it acts as a wonderful organic component to add to your soil so that you can suppress nematodes and create fertility. I don't till it and I don't disturb the soil too much because I don't want to disturb the microbes and the other little organisms that are in there actually creating fertility for me. Now, Sunn Hemp is probably my favorite cover crop because of how versatile and easy it is to grow, and it's pretty. The flowers are really, lovely if you let it flower. The pollinators love those little yellow legume flowers. They really go for those. So it's really just a lovely plant to grow. Another crop that you could grow though is cowpeas. Cowpeas grow prolifically here. We grew cowpeas the very first year. They actually acted as an aphid trap because they just attract aphids so well. So aphids tend to be more attracted to those plants than say to some of my other plants. But the nice thing about cowpeas, or Vigna unguiculata, which they're black-eyed peas. So if you grew up in the South, and you like black-eyed peas, that's what cowpeas are. So you get an edible plant along with a plant that fixes nitrogen for your other plants, and it also is resistant to soil parasites. There are a lot more cover crops that you could grow as green manure here in the South. UF has an article that goes into much more detail than I could here, so I'll leave a link to the description of that in the below. I'll leave a link for the description to that below. So these are good ways that you can help to improve your soil fertility. You can do this in raised beds as well. I've planted Crotalaria, the Sunn Hemp, in my actual raised beds, and then did the same thing. I just covered them with mulch. During the summertime, that's what we like to do. We like to plant cover crops in those beds. I didn't do it this year. We were really busy with our remodel, but in years past, that's what we have done. So yeah, that's a wonderful way that you can improve your soil fertility. Okay, Danny, what about container gardening? I mentioned raised beds, which for me is just a giant container. But this includes all plants in containers, including houseplants. So I have struggled to find ready-made soil at local nurseries, as I mentioned, that don't contain animal products of some sort. You may be able to find something online, but shipping and packaging can be prohibitive. It is for me, and it can be for other people as well. I've learned to make my own soil and Soilless medium, and I've made Soilless medium for my houseplants this year, and they seem to be thriving with that. Whenever I do seed starting, I also create my own seed starting mix. I usually use like a mix of coconut coir and coarse sand, spent rice hulls, and compost, of course. So I personally don't use things like perlite, vermiculite, or peat moss because those are minerals that are mined from the earth, and we simply choose to use things that are the least impactful overall, but that's of course a choice that you need to decide on for yourself. I will leave my recipe for houseplant mix as well as my seed starting mix in the description below. So as I mentioned, we don't have the large rectangular raised beds that some people do. We have 4 recycled old tree planters that were either donated to me or I actually found along the side of the highway, believe it or not, one day. So, but the thing that's nice about these is that if I so choose, I can move them. I hope I don't have to because they're very heavy, but I could move them if I wanted to. So for raised beds, what we did was use a mixture. I put in the bottom of the planters, we put sticks and other debris, some pebbles and stuff, just to allow for good drainage at the bottom. And then we just used native soil with compost and rice hulls, and I might have even mixed in a bit of coconut coir in the top layer just to help with moisture retention. And then of course I usually mulch on top, not a heavy layer, just a small amount of mulch because I want things to reseed like my tomatoes and that. Rice hulls help with drainage, but they also help with moisture retention because they're dry, so as they absorb water, they tend to swell just a little bit. So that provides a nice amount of moisture retention for your soil medium without it being claggy, as they say in the UK. I love that word. So having vegan raised beds isn't difficult. It just takes some planning and having the right ingredients. Now, there are individual soil amendments that you can add that do not contain animal products like alfalfa meal. I would try to get these amendments organic if you can find them available in an organic form. Of course, that's always better. Especially if you're an organic gardener, or a vegan organic gardener. Alfalfa meal acts like a low and slow release plant food that conditions the soil. So alfalfa meal has an NPK, oh goodness, it's about 2.5 to say 0.5 to 2.5. So, and that's going to vary depending on all of these amendments. Their NPK ratio is going to vary depending on the brand that you go with. And alfalfa meal is great for a wide range of plants. It can be added to the soil in granular form, or you can actually make a tea with it to feed your plants a liquid plant food. Now, we try to avoid pesticides in our garden altogether. We just choose not to use them at all. We've created a beautiful system here, and we try to let the system take care of the system. But we have parasitic root knot nematodes, unfortunately, and they are pervasive throughout our system, and they're just pervasive throughout Florida in general. So we're starting to use neem cake as an amendment, and we have discovered through research that it is a wonderful soil addition because it helps to inhibit the growth of certain species of parasitic root knot nematodes, but it also provides soil conditioning, and again, it's a low and slow release of nutrients to your plants. You can also create a soil drench with it, which we plan to do because we have some spots that are just heavily infested with nematodes that we just haven't been able to grow watermelons or cucumbers and things like that because they just have no resistance to nematodes whatsoever. The NPK for neem cake is hard to pin down, but it seems to be about the same as the alfalfa meal. But again, across the brands, this could be different. And from what I understand, neem cake can also reduce the alkalinity of your soil over time. Kelp meal. Kelp meal is another soil amendment that you use to reduce plant stress during transplanting. But it also acts as plant food, so be sure to look for brands that use sustainable growing and harvesting practices when it comes to kelp, if that's something that you care about. Now, cottonseed meal can lower soil pH if that is a need and provides an NPK of 6 to 1, as well as minor plant elements. So that's a much higher nitrogen ratio than the other two that I mentioned. It also aerates dense soil and allows for greater water retention in sandy soils, which we have here in Florida. So those are just some amendments that on their own, you can add to a mix. You can add it to your, garden beds. You can add it to your fruit trees or your herbs or whatever the case, because they're gentle. They're, they're not going to burn your plants. They're not going to contribute to over nitrification and, a lot of chemical fertilizer type deposits in the soil that end up in their waterways and things like that. All right, folks, vegan gardening. Now, I couldn't cover every facet in this particular video because that would just be a really, really long video. But if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I will do my best to answer them for you. If you like this kind of content, if you're interested in growing food in an urban environment or growing natives for wildlife, give us a like, hit subscribe, and I hope to see you again on Peaceful Bird Gardens. Have a lovely afternoon, my sweet friends.